Greg, do you want to start us off? What did you hear in your session? What were kind of some of the big takeaways that happened here?
Yeah, sure. So for the technology town hall, we really focused in on a few key topics. A lot of what we've been discussing here, one of the main ones being fraud, and who is really responsible for making sure that we can eliminate or minimize the fraud in the market. And looking at everyone along the way, from advertisers down to the publishers themselves, and for advertisers, looking at are they putting the right KPIs and metrics in place to ensure that we're optimizing away from where fraudulent activity can happen. So more purchase-based metrics where we know that there's a transaction actually occurring, and we know that it's not just clicking through to where a bot can optimize towards that fraudulent activity. Additionally, on the advertiser side, looking at the pricing pressure that can be applied. When programmatic is brought into a plan, I think initially a lot of people are trying to put that pricing pressure to get really low and efficient CPMs, but programmatic isn't about just getting that type of inventory. There's a lot of premium inventory that's available. So really having that level of education of understanding that you can access premium inventory and make sure that you're shifting your spend away from those publishers where that fraudulent activity occurs. And then looking at the buyers of it, are they putting the right controls in place? We talked about whitelisting and blacklisting, and there's only so much that can help. I mean, certainly it's a good step towards making sure that we're eliminating it, but these bad actors are going to continue to pop up and find loopholes in the system. So looking at that, also ad verification companies, is there consistency across all of them to ensure that we're making sure that they're measuring this and eliminating those types of players in the space that are driving fraud. And then down to publishers and exchanges, looking at all the new publishers that are coming into these ad exchanges where they can be bought in the open market. Are there controls in place to ensure that we're vetting them enough to say, is this a quality site? Is this a quality publisher that we should be buying across? And how are they getting into this open exchange without having that level of vetting? So that was certainly one major area of focus that we talked about for a while.
I was sitting in here, and there was one gentleman in particular who talked about frustration with silos and the difficulty that brings to kind of attribution. I was wondering if you could speak to that a little bit.
Yeah, sure. So I mean, with attribution, we look at the models themselves and some of the silos that they sit in, and looking at mobile, for example, can it be measured within that attribution model in a way where it's effectively telling the advertiser how to shift that spend to drive towards the KPIs? And for attribution itself, everyone's relied on that last click, that last touch model, and it's not always. In most cases, that model is shifting spend towards either fraudulent activity or where that money is not being used most effectively. And then making sure that we're incorporating everything that we need into the attribution model. So things like viewability. I don't know many attribution partners right now that factor that in, if any, right now. And are there additional things like that and mobile that have to be taken into consideration to give you a holistic picture of that performance?
Interesting. So more holistic attribution models as a way to kind of eliminate ad fraud, that being kind of one of the means.
Exactly.
Real quick, we have like another minute. Could you talk about the silos and the type of frustrations that makes for people in the space?
In what silos?
I believe what the gentleman was referring to, and he was specifically referring to it in Facebook and Google and not being able to plan campaigns across the two of them and have them report accurately into one another.
Yeah, so I mean, certainly the way they
and other players as well.
Yeah, I mean, looking at Facebook and Google. And when we talk about mobile, their ability to really kind of make that connection across devices from mobile to the desktop environment, since the data is not being shared and it can't be leveraged across all partners or all the buyers in the market, certainly it limits our ability to target effectively and measure that performance. So there's a lot of frustration about how we can take them into that model to make sure that we're shifting the spend and measuring it appropriately.
Thank you very much, Greg. Matt Spiegel, what was the Talking to Brands and Agencies from?
Yeah, sure. We had, I think, a really great interactive dialogue. There were four, I think, key themes that I would bring back from the conversation. We started on the topic of education. on just how important that is, not just for everyone that attends conferences like these as we educate ourselves, but how important that is really to the executive leadership of whatever our companies are, and how to do that. So not just that it needs to be done, but what's the storyline that's making that possible. And really the theme there was leading with data was one of the key things that a lot of people brought up, is that as they talk to their executive leadership, the ability to talk about how to leverage data to make smarter decisions becomes one of the key themes of being able to change the conversation and make this a topic that they care about.
Interesting. Data is the best kind of educational point.
Well, definitely head nods on the room on that being one of the key points and the first thing to bring up, and start there with the kind of what data leads to. And one of the brand representatives said, and there's a lot of agreement on this as well, that the other thing is to make sure you emphasize you're still trying to accomplish the same things, but with new tools and technologies. That if, we had a little bit of a conversation of let's not get into the sausage making as we try to teach the executive leadership. There's a lot of the ins and outs that we are studying, learning about, talking about with good reason, but the C-suite, that's not what they care about. And so how do we continue to talk about, we're trying to make what we do, the investments we make, smarter, more efficient, and more nimble. Hey, data can be a key piece of that. We then moved to what I call the, quote, in-house question, and just how many layers of that question actually exist, that it's not so simple as, is this something you as a brand are doing this directly or not, that it actually speaks to how do you use technology, what's the right way to use the agency. And we talked about things like it's, again, a complex question, things that have come up that it does take a village, many disciplines are necessary. And
was there a consensus as to what the proper mix was?
I don't know that we got there. I think what we talked about was everyone's going to need to figure this out based on where their organization is stronger, right? And that each company is going to be a little bit different. And that the big thing we talked about, though, is that this shouldn't be a question of just yes or no. Instead, talk about how are you leveraging your partners? How do you engage them in a dialogue to figure out, are you getting the most out of your technology or agency partners? What capabilities do you have internally that you can leverage and make a decision from there, with a common theme that said all the brands were very clear of saying we got to get closer to our data, we have to have more intelligence, and actually a good recognition from a lot of the marketers that said it's actually our job to get more educated such that we can do a better job getting the best work from our partners. That if we don't know what we're talking about, then how do we get good work? So there's a healthy discussion there. That led into a talent discussion, which is there enough of talent in this space?
Common theme.
Yeah, I think quick assessment there was there's not. And one of the things we all have to do is just continue and invest in building this talent ourselves, really invest in the training through conferences like this, the day in, day out of what people are doing in the job was important, that you're not going to just go hire a bunch of people. And then the fourth...
Really? So they saw more as a function of training existing staffs versus hiring programmatic experts?
Whether you're adding new staff or training existing, that the idea that you're going to find the army of experts that you can just add to your team is unlikely.
Yeah.
And that, of course, defining what area of expertise are you looking to add becomes a key part of that. But there was, we didn't go too deep, but there was pretty quick recognition from everybody that while there is more talent in more places than people realize, right, and you got to seek it out and find those experts, and they exist in all sides of the aisle, that certainly there's a talent drop-off, because there just aren't, this is the topic that we are dealing with is new enough that there aren't years and years and years of the armies built out, so you're going to need to do some teaching and training. And then the last topic we spent a little bit of time on is one that just came up a second ago, it was the creative aspect. And it was touched on in two ways, which one was the potential importance of reintegrating, whether truly organizationally or at least just strategically, creative and media, and how just planning these things better together. Acknowledging that if you're not doing good storytelling, if you don't have different messages for different customer segments, what's the point of segmenting them in the first place? And so we didn't get too deep into that conversation either, but became one that I think there's a budding recognition that, again, tech and data enable, but we still are in the marketing business at the end of the day.
If you're just going to create, if you're going to put out that much creative then, and you're going to thin slice your audience so many different ways, how do you meet the production demands then?
We certainly didn't touch on that, but I think that is one of the key questions and one of the reasons why I think we found an industry that hasn't yet embraced dynamic, targetable creative at any level that we'd like. I think technology needs to solve that problem at some level. But I do think that part of the discussion gets into how do agencies continue to morph to be able to handle that reality. But I think we're all, I think, coming to grips with if you don't have that creative differentiation, again, what's the point?
Thank you, Matt Spiegel. Matt Prohaska, what was the word in the publisher room?
So curious, in the audience data sharing internally between brands and agencies, was there any talk of proactively sharing audience data strategy with publishers?
We didn't get into that, no.
Because we did. So we dove into that.
Yeah.
We'll hopefully influence the next agenda. So we talked about 3 things. We had 46 great publishers in the room, and my apologies again to the 7 ad tech companies we had to politely kick out, who didn't realize that we were serious about it being publishers only. Hopefully you found your way into Greg's great chat over there.
Too.
What's that?
We kicked out some publishers.
I would think there was a little bit of cross-pollination there. Or attempted. So our 3 big themes, we talked about the new PMP, as we call it, private marketplace pain. So the room was probably 80-20 in terms of early negative experiences around private marketplaces today versus positive. Fortunately, we found a couple of good...
80 being the negative experiences.
Yeah, just in terms of feel the room of hands that went up out of those that have done PMPs of who's had a good experience or several consistently. So shout outs went out to Amnet and X+1 from a couple of publishers in terms of getting it and actually communicating appropriately and trying to help the publishers help them, kind of Jerry Maguire a little bit. It was about 60% of our time focusing on some of the tactics, some of the questions that publishing sales teams need to be asking agency partners, managed service DSPs, what the differences are, and maybe some of the motivations around the various buying partners. Calling out a couple who seem to have more technical challenges around private deals than they should, given how long they've been in the space and how many really smart people there are globally at a couple particular organizations. Maybe there was almost incentive to stay in the open because it's been such a good time for
Really?
6 years
Interesting.
in the buyer market.
Were some of these people who had kind of negative experiences with the private marketplaces, they're moving back to open, or they're still kind of gritting
No, they're
it out?
kind of evaluating why are we putting all this effort into these PMPs when we still see them bidding in the open on behalf of many clients and with us and with everyone else. And a lot of talk on stage of wanting to do PMPs, and then maybe the reality is that it's $18 a week that shows up through the pipe, and geez, it seems like we have some scale. So we talked about the reality of actually trying to start asking our buying partners appropriately how big, maybe not specifically, hey, can you tell us exactly what cookies you're looking for? But it'd be nice to know the size so we know how many needles in the haystack we're talking about here. And so it would help probably from a forecasting standpoint for publishers in communicating back up through their organizations and just understanding their book of business, and probably from a planning tool for brands as well to realize if this effort is worth it. So getting a little bit of audience discovery and transparency there would help. The balance of our time was focused on talent as well, in terms of, we had a pretty broad mix of publishers in terms of what stage they're at. If you guys remember the Good IAB white paper produced about a year ago today of the various stages of integration, whether it's handled just with the operations department in the open auction or all the way to stage 4, which is full integration of sales teams and everyone in the process instead of a separate team, how to bring on talent for the sales side to be able to leverage who you've got, and then where you leverage the programmatic czar to tout Morrissey's title from a year ago and others. So understanding that each organization might be a little different depending obviously on the leadership and kind of how folks have been historically going to market, and how you can bring in maybe some outside influence and some folks that have been there before and help teach at the same time. Because to Matt's point, it's not like there are 32 people that are just sitting around ready to get hired and do this at one publisher off on the side. So it's early for a lot of folks. The last thing we talked about was attribution, actually. There were 2 companies mentioned earlier in Greg's piece that we know control more than 2/3 of ad spend today in this country. How can publishers start to defend the fact that they're probably converting more customers and leads than they're maybe giving credit for?
Defend themselves against Google and Facebook, 2 advertisers.
Yeah, a lot of them don't have a lot of good first-party reg. Facebook has the best in the world. They've done a great job now with Atlas in creating the world's or tied for the world's best walled garden, right? So, how can we say that the great brand experience or fantastic, sexy, rich media or just commoditized standard 300 by 250 actually did lead to a conversion, even if we didn't actually prove it, and maybe we weren't the last impression that was bought, even if it wasn't viewable, but because someone else kind of snuck in an open market, maybe they're getting credit.
Did you come up with an answer?
What's that?
Did you come up with an answer?
There were a couple of possible suggestions around leveraging DMPs a little bit better, leveraging cross-channel attribution a little bit better, but again, some of the partnerships in the plumbing to be able to prove that out, as well as a couple other folks, are falling short right now. So, getting more in touch with the attribution ad tech companies that are in the room here and out there to be able to kind of arm up and start to go to market a little bit smarter, saying, no, actually we can help not just with brand awareness, but that performance advertising, which is still a good, 80% plus of all programmatic ad spend today, right?
Interesting. Talent, collaboration, attribution, some pretty common themes. Thank you, all three of you, for helping out with the town hall.